You're walking through a silent cave when you spot something that stops you cold. Dozens of skulls, neatly arranged in a circle, bones stained with red ochre, tiny handprints painted on walls beside shattered femurs. You think this is a burial site, but then you see the marks on the bones, cut marks, burn marks, teeth marks. This wasn't just burial, this was something else, and it's not what you've been told. From sky burials to corpse cannibalism, from fire pits to bogs, what ancient humans did to their dead wasn't just about respect. Sometimes it was about survival, fear, or something much darker. Close your eyes for a second and imagine this. A small group of early humans stands in a clearing. The fire crackles softly nearby. In the centre, a body lies motionless, not left to rot, not dragged away by scavengers. Instead, something strange is happening. They're gathering. One person gently sprinkles red powder over the body, crimson dust made from crushed ochre stone. Another arranges stones around it in a loose circle. A third begins humming softly, swaying in rhythm with the flames. This isn't just disposal, it's a ritual. Now pause. That scene may have played out over 100,000 years ago, and it represents something huge, something uniquely human. The moment when death stopped being a fact and started becoming a story. See, for most of history, when something died, animal, predator, even another tribe member, it was just that. Dead. But then something shifted. Our ancestors began to treat the dead differently, not as garbage, not as meat, but as something sacred. And that's the first major clue. Death didn't just scare ancient humans, it meant something. Maybe it was grief, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the beginning of a deeper belief that this person, this body, was still connected to something bigger. We start seeing it in the archaeological record too. The site of Kafsa Cave in modern-day Israel holds remains dated over 90,000 years old. One of the skeletons there was buried with red ochre and deer antlers. Think about that. They didn't just dig a hole, they decorated the dead. They honoured them. Even earlier, at sites like Cima de los Huesos in Spain, scientists found a single stone hand axe placed beside a body. Perfectly symmetrical, beautiful, almost artistic. It wasn't the kind of tool you'd use. It was more like an offering. So what changed? Simple answer, awareness. These early humans began to notice death, to feel it, and crucially to remember the dead. Where do we go when we die? Does something remain after breath leaves the body? How do we keep their spirit close, or keep it away? That shift, from disposal to ritual, was a turning point in human evolution. It's what separates us from animals. Even today we bury our dead. We light candles. We grieve through ceremonies passed down for generations. But back then, they were inventing those traditions in real time. And the story of how they got there only gets stranger from here. So let's ask the obvious question. Why bury the dead at all? Why go through the trouble of digging, decorating, and watching over a body when you could just walk away? The answer? It's layered, and surprisingly practical at first. Let's rewind to the Paleolithic world. Death was everywhere. Disease, infection, predators. A rotting body didn't just attract flies, it invited danger. Bears, wolves, lions. If you left a body near the camp, you weren't just being disrespectful. You were putting the whole tribe at risk. So the first burials, they might have started as survival strategies. Dig a hole, bury the smell, hide the scent from scavengers, done. But over time, something changed. Because we don't just see hasty burials, we see careful ones. Graves lined with stones, bodies arranged in fetal positions, ochre, beads, flowers, even tools placed near the dead. That's not hygiene, that's intention. And that intention hints at something deeper. The rise of memory, of grief, of meaning. Let's take Shanidar Cave in present-day Iraq. Over 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals buried a man there, with flowers. Pollen samples show that wildflowers had been laid beside the body. Some scientists believe it was purely symbolic, maybe even the first funeral. Think about that. Neanderthals, often labelled brutish or primitive, might have stood in silence laying flowers for their dead, mourning, honouring, feeling. And it didn't stop there. Across Europe and Asia, graves from tens of thousands of years ago show signs of ritual. Shell beads carefully sewn onto clothing. stone tools placed beside hands, red ochre covering bones like blood from another world. Some researchers believe these weren't just acts of respect, they were spiritual insurance, a way of helping the dead pass into another world, or protecting the living from whatever might return. In other words, burial was never just about the dead, it was also about the living. Those still breathing had to make peace with what they'd lost. They had to explain it, honour it, maybe even control it. And over generations, these rituals became myths, which became stories, which became culture. The dead, it turns out, helped shape who we are. But as you'll see next, not all rituals were peaceful. By now, burials weren't just practical, they were powerful. But here's where things get even more interesting. Ancient humans didn't just bury the dead, they began to talk to them. Not in the way we might today with memories or prayers. No, this was something more raw, more physical. They kept bones, they painted skulls. They arranged the dead into sacred spaces, as if the body itself still meant something long after life left it. At sites like Jericho over 9,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered skulls that had been plastered and painted. The faces were reconstructed with clay, eyeballs inlaid with shells. These weren't buried deep underground. They were kept in homes. Why? Some believe they were a form of ancestor worship, a reminder that the dead still watched, still mattered. Maybe they were consulted, honoured, even feared. The dead weren't gone. They were present, visibly, literally in the community. And that shaped how people lived. Who you buried next to, what you were buried with, whether your body was whole or dismembered, all of it reflected status, memory, even mythology. You didn't just die and disappear. You became a symbol. Over time, gravesites evolved into sacred spaces, caves, stone circles, and eventually full-blown temples. Think Göbekli Tepe, in modern-day Turkey, 12,000 years old and filled with carvings of animals and humans. It's not a burial site, but it shows that the dead had already transformed from bodies as into stories carved in stone. And that's the moment where ancient humans crossed a threshold. They stopped fearing death as an end and began treating it as a beginning, the start of legend, of memory, of belief. The dead became storytellers, and their bones became our first libraries. Up next in Chapter 2, we dive deeper into the strange and beautiful rituals, why skulls were arranged in circles, why bodies were painted red, and what those ancient gestures tell us about the birth of the human soul. Picture this, a body freshly buried in a shallow grave. But before the earth covers it, something is sprinkled over the skin, something deep red, powdery, ancient. Red ochre. For thousands of years, humans across Africa, Europe, Asia, even early Australia, buried their dead covered in this vivid crimson dust. And not just a little. Some graves contain pounds of it, enough to dye every inch of flesh. Why? That question has puzzled archaeologists for decades. Some say it symbolized blood, the essence of life, spilled and returned to the earth. Others think it was a stand-in for fire, a purifying force, burning away the spirit's earthly shell before it crossed into the unknown. But here's the twist. It wasn't just symbolic, it was universal. Cultures with no contact, separated by oceans and millennia, all used red ochre in their burial rituals. That points to something bigger, something instinctive. Maybe ochre wasn't just decoration, maybe it was protection. Think about it. You're a prehistoric human. You believe that when someone dies, something leaves the body or lingers. A spirit, a shadow, a force. Covering the corpse in red ochre might have been a way to shield it, or to shield you from it. In some regions, ochre was applied to the joints, eyes, and mouth, almost like sealing doors shut. Others painted the entire grave in red. Not just the body, the whole chamber. It's not hard to imagine the emotion behind it. Maybe they thought red would keep the soul warm. Maybe it would trick predators or spirits. Maybe it was a way of saying, you're still part of the tribe. Whatever the reason, the effect is the same. When you see a 30,000-year-old skeleton glowing with red dust, something stirs inside you. Because that wasn't just a burial, it was a message. The dead weren't being discarded, they were being honoured and painted like art. And what they did next with the bones? Even stranger. Now imagine this. A grave is uncovered deep in a cave. The skeleton is missing something, its skull. But it's not gone. It's been removed. Intentionally. Nearby, archaeologists find a ring of skulls, some facing inward, some stacked, some even carved or etched with patterns, and the bodies scattered, dismembered, or missing entirely. What's going on here? This wasn't random violence, this was ritual. Across the ancient world, humans treated the skull like something separate from the rest of the body, special, sacred, maybe even powerful. Skulls were kept, displayed, sometimes even buried alone, far from the body they once belonged to. At sites like Çatalhöyük in Turkey, skulls were found plastered and painted, kept in homes, buried beneath sleeping mats, placed in walls. These weren't trophies, they were relics. Some were ancestors, some maybe enemies, but all were treated with an eerie kind of reverence. Why? Because ancient humans may have believed the skull held the soul, or perhaps the memory of a person. The way we carry photos today, they carried bones. And it wasn't just human skulls. In some graves you'll find animal skulls, carefully arranged. Cattle, deer, even cats. Were they spirit guides, companions for the afterlife, protective totems? And then there's the circles. In parts of Europe, entire rings of skulls have been discovered, positioned like guardians around grave sites. Some researchers believe they marked territory. Others say they were symbols of tribal identity, spiritual barriers, or tools for connecting with the afterlife. Whatever the purpose, one thing is clear. The dead weren't silent. Their bones spoke to the living, and skulls were the loudest voice in that ancient conversation. We like to think of skulls as symbols of death. But to early humans, they may have been symbols of life continuing, through memory, through spirit, through something they didn't yet have words for. And when death met the sacred, it gave birth to the first monuments. You're walking through a clearing at dawn, mist clings to the grass, then you see them, massive stones rising from the earth like teeth, arranged in a perfect circle, silent, immovable, timeless. This isn't a modern monument, it's 10,000 years old, and it was built for the dead. Monuments to the dead weren't always obvious tombs. Some look like altars, others like strange geometrical alignments with the sun, moon, or stars. But one thing ties them all together. They changed the landscape. These weren't graves hidden in the dirt anymore. They were statements, symbols. The dead belonged to the land, and the land remembered them. Take Stonehenge, for example. Long before tourists and time turned it into a curiosity, it was likely a burial complex. Archaeologists have uncovered dozens of cremated remains at its core, many buried with care, with tools, beads, and bone pins. The stones may have stood not just as calendar markers, but as gateways between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. In Malta, the Halsaflieni Hypogeum, an underground labyrinth carved by hand, is filled with rooms where sound echoes like a heartbeat. It was used for burials and rituals. Some say the acoustics were designed to connect with the dead through chanting or drumming, vibrations travelling between realms. Even Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known temple in the world, has no signs of domestic life, but it's covered in carvings of animals and human-like figures. Some researchers believe it wasn't a place for the living, but a meeting place with the ancestors. So what does all this tell us? The further back we go, the clearer it becomes. Ancient humans didn't fear death the way we do. They honoured it. They built around it. They used the memory of the dead to anchor their myths, their calendars, even their communities. The first temples weren't dedicated to gods. They were built for the bones of those who came before. And those stones, they still speak. In Chapter 3, we explore the other side of this legacy. When the dead weren't buried at all, but exposed, burned, or even eaten, and why? Burying the dead might seem like the most natural thing in the world. But for many ancient humans, burial wasn't the answer. Sometimes they didn't bury the body at all, they exposed it. To the wind, to the sun, to the sky. This practice, known today as excarnation, wasn't a careless disposal. It was intentional, sacred, and deeply symbolic. Imagine this, a raised platform made of stone or branches placed high in the open air. A body lies there, arms folded, eyes closed, dressed in animal skins or nothing at all. Birds begin to gather, vultures, crows, eagles. Over days, the elements reclaim the flesh. The bones bleach white under the sun. This wasn't just tolerated, it was desired. Because to many prehistoric cultures, the sky was the realm of spirits, and the birds, they were messengers. eating the body was a form of transformation, not desecration, but elevation. In Tibet, variations of this practice still survive in what's known as a sky burial. And across the ancient world, from the American Southwest to the steppes of Eurasia, archaeological evidence shows that exposure was often more common than burial. But why? For starters, practicality. In regions where the ground was frozen or rocky, digging a grave was nearly impossible, but more importantly, belief. Some early cultures may have believed the body needed to be freed from gravity, from the earth, from decay. Letting nature strip it down was part of a spiritual journey. And here's the wildest part. In some places only the important parts were kept. The long bones, the skull. These were collected after exposure and taken home, placed in shrines, or reburied in sacred sites. The dead were not just returned to nature, they were given to it. And what nature didn't take, humans sometimes did. Next up, we enter the deeply controversial and spine-chilling world of ritual cannibalism. Because not all ancient humans buried, burned, or exposed their dead. Some ate them. That's right. Ritual cannibalism wasn't just a rare anomaly, it left physical evidence. And it tells a story more complex than simple hunger or horror. Let's start with Gough's Cave in England. Inside this Paleolithic site, archaeologists found human bones, skulls, femurs, ribs, with marks on them, but not from natural decay. These bones had cut marks, scraping, butchering patterns, identical to those made when processing animal meat. And the skulls? They were cleaned so precisely they appear to have been turned into drinking bowls. What could possibly explain this? Shockingly, it wasn't about starvation. In some cases, there were plenty of animal remains nearby. If they were desperate, they didn't show it. So the question becomes, why eat the dead if you didn't have to? There are a few theories. Spiritual transfer. Some anthropologists believe early humans thought eating part of someone, especially a leader, warrior, or family member, would transfer their strength, wisdom, or spirit into the living. Mourning rituals. In certain tribal traditions that survived into more recent centuries, consuming a portion of a loved one was an act of grief and closeness, not violence. It was intimate. Territorial dominance. In other cases, cannibalism may have been a message to rivals, a way to say your kind dies here and becomes part of us. But there's a darker angle too. Some of these sites, like El Sidrón in Spain, show signs of entire family groups being butchered and eaten, including children. The lines between ritual survival and warfare blur fast. Still, one truth rises above the rest. Early humans saw the body as more than flesh. It was symbol, energy, memory. And in some cultures, consuming the dead wasn't an act of destruction. It was a twisted form of preservation. Coming up, how fire reshaped everything, not just death, but how we remember the dead. If water and earth returned the body to nature and sky gave it to the gods, then fire did something altogether different. It transformed the dead. Cremation is often seen as a modern practice, but in reality its roots stretch back tens of thousands of years. At the Lake Mungo site in Australia, archaeologists found what might be the world's oldest known cremation. A woman, burned, her remains carefully buried afterward. Estimated age? At least 20,000 years old. So why burn the dead? Fire wasn't just a tool, it was power. A force of destruction, yes, but also purification, renewal, transcendence. To ancient humans, burning the body may have meant freeing the soul, turning the heavy, decaying flesh into smoke and light, releasing it skyward. Some early cremation sites are surrounded by charcoal, ash pits, and burned bones arranged in patterns. This wasn't just disposal, it was ceremony, a sacred act. But fire also offered control. Unlike exposure, which relied on nature and time, cremation was immediate, final, clean. It left behind something manageable, ash. And ash was powerful. In some cultures it was collected in urns, sometimes buried, sometimes displayed. In others it was scattered in rivers or spread across hunting grounds, returning the dead to the world they lived in. There's evidence that ash was even mixed into paint, used in cave art, rituals, or body decoration. Imagine wearing your ancestor during a hunt or a rite of passage. To us, it sounds haunting. To them, it may have been the deepest form of connection. And when we look closely, we see a transition happening in these cremation rituals. Death was no longer a moment, it became a process, one that involved fire, memory, and legacy. The dead were no longer just mourned, they were ritually reborn. In the next chapter, we go even deeper into the most mysterious, symbolic, and sometimes terrifying evolution in human death rituals: tombs, totems, and the birth of myth. When we think of ancient death rituals, it's easy to imagine graves as simple holes in the ground. But for early humans, tombs were something far more profound. Sacred spaces, carefully crafted and charged with meaning. As prehistoric communities grew, they began creating elaborate burial sites, sometimes deep inside caves, other times marked by massive stone structures or earth mounds. These tombs were more than just resting places. They were gateways between the living and the dead. Inside, archaeologists find artifacts, beads, tools, ochre paint, and sometimes even figurines. Each item tells a story, hinting that ancient humans believed the dead needed these objects in their journey beyond. But why did they invest so much effort? Because death wasn't just an end, it was a transition. The dead were thought to enter another realm, a world where ancestors lived on, watching over their descendants. And this belief sparked something even more powerful: the birth of myth. Myths weren't just stories. They were a way to explain the mysteries of life, death, and the universe. Why did the sun set? Where did souls go? What happened to those who died young or violently? Through stories told around fires and carved into walls, ancient humans began creating a shared cosmology, a system of beliefs that connected the living, the dead, and the world around them. At the heart of these stories were symbols and totems, images that represented tribes, ancestors, or spiritual forces. These symbols became the foundation of identity, community, and connection. In the next part, we'll explore these totems, how they embodied ancestral spirits and shaped the way early humans lived, fought, and worshipped. As ancient tombs became sacred spaces, they gave rise to totemic beliefs. The idea that certain animals, plants, or natural forces were deeply connected to clans or families. These totems weren't mere symbols. They were believed to embody the spirits of ancestors and serve as powerful protectors. For example, some tribes revered wolves, bears, or eagles not just for their strength, but because these creatures were seen as ancestral guides or guardians. Totems shaped social structure, rituals, and even hunting practices. Burial sites sometimes contained carvings or paintings of these totems, linking the deceased to their spiritual guardians and affirming the tribe's identity. Totemism also offered a way to connect the living with the dead, creating a continuous relationship rather than a permanent separation. This connection reinforced the tribe's cohesion and survival, reminding everyone that the ancestors were still watching, guiding, and protecting. In the next part, we'll dive into the earliest myths about the afterlife, how ancient humans imagined souls, spirits, and what lay beyond death. With tombs and totems anchoring their beliefs, ancient humans began weaving stories about the afterlife, attempting to explain what happens when the body dies but the spirit lives on. These early myths were deeply tied to their environment and experiences. Some imagined souls traveling to a distant land, others believed in rebirth or transformation into animals or stars. Burial goods, like weapons, jewelry, or food, hint that they believed the dead needed these for their journey. Cave paintings and symbolic artifacts often depicted animals or spirit figures, suggesting a rich spiritual world beyond the physical. These myths helped communities cope with loss, fear, and the unknown, offering hope and meaning amid a brutal existence. They also laid the groundwork for future religions, philosophies, and cultural practices that still shape how humans understand life and death. Understanding these origins reveals how deeply human our ancestors were, not just survivors, but storytellers searching for meaning in the face of mortality. Though tens of thousands of years have passed, the ancient rituals surrounding death continue to echo in our modern world. From the way we mourn to the symbols we use in memorials, the legacy of prehistoric death practices remains deeply woven into human culture. Think about a funeral procession or the careful placement of flowers on a grave. These acts are more than tradition. They're echoes of those first humans who buried their dead with care, who believed that honouring the departed was essential for the community's survival and well-being. Many cultures today still incorporate fire in funerals, cremations or candlelight vigils, carrying forward the ancient idea of fire as a transformative and purifying force. The use of totems or symbols in family crests, tattoos, or memorial art similarly harks back to the earliest totemic beliefs that connected people to their ancestors and natural world. Even the stories we tell about death, ghosts, spirits, journeys to another realm can be traced back to prehistoric myths crafted to make sense of mortality and loss. These narratives help us cope, heal, and maintain bonds with those who have passed. Anthropologists argue that these rituals are not just cultural artifacts but biological imperatives. Honoring the dead strengthens social bonds and helps communities process grief, fostering resilience, just as it did for our ancestors in the harsh prehistoric world. Our connection to ancient death rituals reminds us that humans, across time and geography, share a profound need to find meaning in death and to keep the memory of our ancestors alive. In the next part, we'll explore how modern science uncovers the stories of these ancient people and what those discoveries tell us about ourselves. Modern science is unlocking secrets buried deep in the earth and in our DNA that connect us directly to those ancient humans who first crafted death rituals. Archaeologists uncover burial sites revealing not just bones but clues about how prehistoric people lived, loved, and honoured their dead. The artefacts found alongside skeletons, tools, ornaments, food offerings tell stories of care, belief, and community. Meanwhile, geneticists study ancient DNA extracted from fossils, revealing how early humans migrated, interbred, and passed on traits that shape us today. This scientific detective work shows that our ancestors' survival strategies, including their social bonds and rituals, are encoded in our very genes. For example, discoveries of Neanderthal burial suggest these early humans practiced deliberate interment, hinting at a shared sense of respect and perhaps even mourning. Such findings blur the line between modern humans and our evolutionary cousins, emphasizing how universal the need to honor the dead truly is. By connecting the past to the present, science not only deepens our understanding of human history, but also reminds us that we are part of a vast, unbroken chain of life, death, and memory. Next up, we'll look at why death rituals remain essential for identity and community in today's world. Death rituals aren't just relics of the past, they're vital threads in the fabric of human identity and community. Across the world today, ceremonies honoring the dead bring people together in shared grief, remembrance, and celebration. These gatherings fulfill deep emotional needs, helping us process loss and reaffirm bonds with family, tribe, and culture. The ancient practice of telling stories about those who passed lives on in eulogies, memorials, and even social media tributes. By keeping memories alive, we maintain connections that transcend time and space, echoing prehistoric humans' need to honor ancestors as protectors and guides. Even modern psychological research highlights the healing power of ritual. Participating in rites of passage around death can reduce anxiety, build resilience, and provide a sense of meaning in the face of mortality. Ultimately, death rituals remind us of our shared humanity. They teach acceptance, connection, and the importance of community, a lesson our prehistoric ancestors learned through harsh, unforgiving experience. We've journeyed through the mysterious world of ancient death rituals, from simple burials to the birth of myth, and the deep human need to connect across generations. These practices weren't just about handling death. They were about survival, identity, and hope. Our ancestors faced a brutal world, yet they found meaning and community through rituals that still shape us today. Every funeral, every story, every symbol we use echoes back to those early humans trying to make sense of life's greatest mystery. So next time you attend a memorial or reflect on a lost loved one, remember, you're part of a tradition tens of thousands of years old, a tradition that speaks to the heart of what it means to be human. If you found this exploration eye-opening, hit subscribe for more stories from our ancient past, and tell me in the comments which ancient ritual surprised you the most. Let's start a conversation about how the dead continue to shape our lives. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.